Hey, we're finishing today our series. We've been walking through the book of Philippians. If you've got a Bible with you, I'd encourage you to open it up to Philippians chapter 4. Just by way of reminder, Philippians chapter 1, we see that it dealt with, let me also say, if you didn't get a communion cup, now's a great time to slide out and grab one, all right? They're on the tables in the foyer. We'll be using that later. Chapter 1 of Philippians dealt with this idea that there's going to be pressure on your lives. And of course, we see that in our world today, that nothing's new, right? There's going to be pressure in our lives, and largely, part of our conflict, part of our pressure is the fact that we're trying to follow Christ in a world that's not Christian, in a culture that's not Christian. So Paul says in chapter 1, you're going to have this conflict from the outside that's going to press against you. And so in order to follow Christ in this non-Christian world, you've got to change your perspective on several different things. You've got to change the way you think. That was chapter 1, pressure from the outside. Chapter 2, Paul says you're going to continue with pressure, not just on the outside, but it's also going to be on the inside as well. Sometimes Christians have disagreements. Sometimes Christ followers can be at odds with one another. And so Paul says in chapter 2, if I were to summarize, he says, listen, you've got to find unity. The thing that binds you together is stronger than the disagreements that you have. And so you'll have pressure from the outside, you'll have pressure from the inside. Find that unity. He says, in the John Welch paraphrase, he says, don't make it harder, right? Don't shoot your friends, right? Chapter 3, then, he dealt with values. To follow Christ in a non-Christian world, we've got to evaluate what do we really find valuable. If you recall last week, if you were with us, it kind of gave us the three pillars that we kind of set our life on. These three pillars, if we measured, these three pillars will indicate what we truly find valuable. Sometimes what we think we value and what we actually value can be different things. How do we figure that out? Well, there's three pillars I introduced last week. How do I spend my time, my energy, and my resources? If I look at those three things, my time, my energy, and resources, it will show me what I find valuable in life. Sometimes I can say, well, I value X, but if my time, my energy, my resources don't support that, well, I can have stated values that aren't realized values or real values. And so chapter 3 all dealt with the idea of making Christ of supreme value in our life, more important than anything else. Chapter 4, we finished today. Chapter 4, verse 1, let's kind of dive into it. Therefore, my brothers, whom I love and long for, my joy and crown, stand firm thus in the Lord, my beloved. Really, I think that chapter 4, verse 1 really ties and concludes chapter 3, really. Remember, chapter and verse numbers weren't original in Paul's writings. They were put in years later in order to help us navigate these writings. Chapter 4, verse 1 kind of summarizes the previous chapter, chapter 3. Therefore, my brothers, whom I love and long for, my joy, my crown. Fun little thing about that crown there. That crown, when we think crown, I often think of a crown like a king would wear. But the word that's used here is not describing a king's crown, but rather an award that a winner of a race would get. Like in the Olympic Games, they would get this crown that they would wear. It was a prize. He says, you are my joy and my prize. Stand firm in the Lord. And then in verse 2, he continues, and we referenced this a couple weeks ago, Euodia and Syntyche. He says, I entreat Euodia and I entreat Syntyche to agree in the Lord. And at that point, you all should be very proud of your pastor here, because I said those names. I know some of you are like, I'm so proud of you. I practiced. Okay, Euodia and Syntyche agree in the Lord. In chapter 2, we looked at this verse a little bit. We know that there's some type of conflict between these two women. We don't know what the conflict was about, but we saw the results of it. There was disagreement. There was disunity within the body. And look what Paul says to them. He says, I entreat both of you to agree in the Lord. Not Euodia agree with Syntyche or Syntyche agree with Euodia, but agree in the Lord. Whatever their conflict was about, they had forgotten that what they had in common was more important than the things they had different opinion on. Agree in the Lord. Also, look at verse 3 here. Yes, I also ask you, true companion, that's whoever he's writing to here, help these women who have labored side by side with me in the gospel, together with Clement and the rest of my fellow workers, whose names are in the book of life. Can I just point out here, what do you know about Euodia and Syntyche? Well, primarily we know that they had conflict. We also know that they were co-laborers in the gospel with Paul. Now imagine this for just a second, just play with me for just a second. Imagine getting to heaven one day and seeing Euodia and Syntyche. How embarrassed are they going to be? Because they were called out by Paul's writings here, you know what I mean? Like we see that they're faithful laborers, but we also see that they go down in history as being called out by the Apostle Paul because of their disagreement. I think that's funny. Agree in the Lord, he says. The good news for Euodia and Syntyche is that they are faithful workers of the gospel, but the bad news is they will always be known as two women who had some type of a disagreement and fight. You know, it's funny. There are faithful followers of Christ. They are faithful followers of Christ, and yet they still had a falling out with one another. And I think that's important for us to remember today. It's important for us to be reminded faithful followers of Christ will still have disagreements. They will still have frustrations. They will still be tempted to fall out with one another. As we follow Christ in this non-Christian world, as a church here, for example, we will have disagreements amongst our people. Guess what? That's okay. That's okay. We'll have conflict in our lives, but Paul's point to these two women and to us is don't allow these conflicts to separate you. Agree in the Lord. Don't allow these, we live in a culture where if we have a disagreement with someone, then our temptation is to sever ties with them and be done. Well, I can't believe they said this. I can't believe they did this. I'm just done with that person. We just write people off. Our temptation largely is to separate and to just be done with somebody. That's not the gospel. That's not forgiveness. That's not grace. That's not Christian living. Paul says, remember to agree in the Lord here. Don't cut ties and run. Remember that what you have that ties you together is something that can't be severed, and that's the Lord. Charles Spurgeon, old dead preacher, he says this about this. I want to share this. I thought this was good. He says, I'm glad that we don't know what the quarrel was about. I'm usually thankful for such ignorance on such subjects. But as a cure for disagreements, the Apostle Paul says, and he will say in the next verse, rejoice in the Lord always. People who are very happy, especially those who are happy in the Lord, are not apt to either give offense or take offense. Their minds are so sweetly occupied with higher things that they are not easily distracted by the little troubles which naturally arise among such imperfect creatures as we are. Joy in the Lord is the cure for all discord. I thought that was a pretty wise statement. He says, and Spurgeon alludes to, verse 4, Paul says, after he tells these women to agree in the Lord and help these women to agree in the Lord, he says, verse 4, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say, rejoice. This is the major theme of this letter. Rejoice in the Lord. Find joy in the Lord. When he is our common value, when he is the tie that binds us together, we can find joy even in the midst of conflict. Remember, Paul's writing from a place of conflict. He's in a Roman house arrest. He's writing to people who are in the midst of conflict. And yet the focus is not the conflict. The focus is not about making that conflict right. The focus is on the joy of the Lord throughout this entire letter. Paul's joy wasn't based on the circumstances, but rather based on the Lord. He says in verse 5 also, and I think this is encouragement for Euodia and Syntyche, and to us as well, that your reasonableness be known to everyone. That your reasonableness be known to everyone. Sometimes we've just got to be reasonable with one another. Just be reasonable. We don't have to agree. Let's just be reasonable with one another. Let's agree in the Lord. Let's find that unity and allow that unity to overtake. He says in verse 5, the Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, But in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Can I point out verse 6 here isn't an option? It's a command that Paul's giving his people here. Don't be anxious about anything. Don't be anxious. Now, the funny thing, I'll tell you, and Amanda is not here today, so she's over in the children's ministry right now, but she could tell you, I'm prone to get a little anxious, especially if I'm on like prednisone. I can be like a cat on a hot tin roof, you know what I mean? I can get amped up over some of the silliest things because my desire is to fix it, solve it, correct it, make it right. I'm tired of it not being right, and so I want to make it right. And I can get anxious and amped up and in turmoil inside. I can get anxious pretty quickly. Paul says here, don't be anxious about anything. Command. But in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Think about it like this. Imagine for just a second, if you're a parent in here, imagine if your children were to come to you this afternoon and say, Mom, Dad, listen, we got a problem. I'm not sure we can pay our electric bill this month. I've been thinking about it, Mom and Dad, and I think that what we need to do is we need to pay the electric bill, but that's not pay our water bill. And imagine your child, your 10-year-old trying to navigate that for you. What would your response be? Well, I can tell you my response at first, I'd be like, what are you talking about? That's not, like, why are you concerned about this? Why are you meddling in, that's a mom and dad issue, not a child issue. My grandmother used to say, you can't put big heads on little bodies, right? This is not a child. Mom and dad are going to take care of this. Stay in your lane, kid. Go color, go watch TV, go do something productive. You can't solve this. This is the dad issue. I wonder if that's how our Heavenly Father looks at me when I get worked up sometimes. I get worked up over the silly things, and I think, oh, God, I'll tell you what, I can fix this by doing this and doing this. And I wonder if sometimes God's saying, John, go color. Go do something else. You're worrying about something that I'm going to take care of. I wonder if we started thinking about things through that lens, if that would help us. Paul says, don't be anxious about this. I'm reminded of Jesus' teachings about the birds of the air and the flowers of the field. How does being anxious help those things? And yet, how much more valuable are you? Jesus says. That's a grown-up issue, John. Let your Father in heaven deal with it. Paul says, don't be anxious, but instead, in everything, with prayer and supplication, make your requests known to God. You know, in the Greek, the word everything, do you know what that means in the Greek? Everything. I know. Deep, profound. Right? Everything. Well, can I take this? Yes. Yes, you can take this to God. Take this to God. Prayer, there is a word, a broad word that talks about our communication with God. Supplication means directly asking God for something. I think it's great that God invites us to share our requests with him, to make our requests known. While he knows it already, yes, the Lord knows your heart. But I think he still wants, I know my kids want to eat, but sometimes I think it's important for them to say, Dad, I'm hungry. You know what I mean? Like he knows my heart. He knows what's going on with me. And yet he still invites me to share these requests to him. He encourages us to make our requests known. But notice the key word here that I often forget, that I think we often forget. Thankful. Make your requests known with prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving. Don't whine and complain. Don't whine and complain before God. I like this quote here. Be anxious for nothing, pray about everything, and be thankful for anything. How would that change our daily walks? Be anxious for nothing, pray about everything, and be thankful for anything. That's Paul's encouragement here, and he continues. And the peace of God, in verse 7, the peace of God which surpasses all understanding. This peace of God is described with these words, which surpasses all understanding. This peace of God, the Bible speaks of peace with God, or God's peace, or peace being connected with God in a couple different ways. There's peace from God. There's peace with God because of the atoning work of Jesus. Here we have the peace of God. right? The peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your mind in Christ Jesus. If we handle our anxiety by saying, I'm going to choose not to be anxious, but rather to take my requests to God with thanksgiving and make my requests known to God with thanksgiving, Paul says here, the peace of God, which surpasses your understanding. It won't make sense why you have this peace. This peace will guard your hearts and your minds. The word guard there is an interesting word. It's a military term. It's a military action. It's something that the peace of God does for us. It protects, it guards like a bodyguard for our heart and our mind. We need that, don't we? We need a bodyguard for our heart and our mind. Paul says this is what the peace of God will do. It will guard your hearts. You're familiar with the idea or the phrase, well, he lost his heart? Right? A soldier going into battle lost his heart, or that person going through a conflict lost their mind. It's a lack of the peace of God being present. The peace of God will guard your heart and your mind in Christ. What a wonderful promise. Instead of focusing on the things that are anxiety-filled, the things that are prone to bring you anxiety, Paul says this. He says, here's your focus in verse 8. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever's honorable, whatever's just, whatever's pure, whatever's lovely, whatever's commendable. If there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Now listen, this list is pretty straightforward, right? There's not much sense in breaking through what each of these are. We understand what this is. Paul says, focus your mind on these things. Think about these things. And what you've learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things. And the God of peace will be with you. I think that's a fun turn of phrase there. Previously, he says, if you make these requests known to God, then the peace of God will be with you, will guard your hearts. But now if you focus on these things, look at your company. The God of peace will be with you. These things that he lists here, they're the food for the mind that's guarded by the peace of God. You know, so much of the Christian life is about our minds. It's about what we focus on, what we take in. Romans 12:2, if you recall, Paul says, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. By testing, you may discern what the will of God is, what's good and acceptable and perfect. In 2 Corinthians 10, Paul says, we destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. What we do with our minds is so incredibly important. Our mind can be bombarded and swelled up with this anxiety-ridden worry, stress, or we can give God what's God's, trusting with thanksgiving that he's going to guard our hearts and our minds, and the peace of God will be within. And as we'll focus on these things that are good food for our minds, what we choose to meditate on matters. Now look at verse 10. This is where I want to spend most of our time today. And you're like, aren't you done yet? Close. Chapter 4, verse 10, Paul shifts topics. Remember, this is a letter that's written to some people. It's written to this church. And look, now he's going to change topic. Instead of instructions now, he's going to talk about what they have done and what they will continue to do. He says in verse 10, I rejoice in the Lord greatly that now at length you have revived your concern for me. You were indeed concerned for me, but you had no opportunity. What's he talking about? What Paul's talking about here is the financial support that this church was able to provide to him. The church in Philippi had sent him a financial gift. In chapter 2, verse 25, we see that they had sent Epaphroditus, who Paul describes as my fellow brother and worker and fellow soldier. And he says, your messenger and minister to my need, in chapter 2, verse 25. That guy had brought a financial gift and cared for Paul's needs. I was doing so good, wasn't I? I know. He had cared for Paul's needs now that he's in a Roman house arrest. See, they had supported Paul originally as a missionary, and when they could no longer do that, Paul was continuing to do his ministry. In fact, he points to that. He says in verse 11, he says, now that now that I am speaking of being in need, not that I'm speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation to be content. And I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. And in any circumstance, I have learned the secret to facing plenty and hunger and abundance and need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. One of the most taken out of context verses in history. Yet it was kind of you to share my trouble. Here's what had happened. The Philippians had supported Paul as a missionary, and Paul will allude to that more when he was on his second missionary journey. They had supported him financially. When they were no longer able to do that, whether by you couldn't just wire money to somebody back in the day, right? And so when that wasn't possible anymore, they had stopped. But now that they had heard that he was in Roman house arrest, they had sent Epaphroditus to minister to him again. And Paul's thanking them for that. But his focus is not necessarily on the gift, but what the gift represents. See, he speaks to what it's going to do for them. He says, I'm content. In all situations, whether I've got a lot or little, I'm good. I've learned the secret to facing plenty and hunger and abundance and need. There's that famous verse in verse 13, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. You know, this is not a victorious verse. We read this on the back of football jerseys and stuff, right? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, so I can score this touchdown, whatever. Like we see, it's often used as a victorious thing, but the context of it is I can suffer greatly because he's with me. I can endure hardships. I know how to handle a lot and a little because I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Yet it was kind of you to share in my trouble, he says. You Philippians yourselves know that in the beginning of the gospel, when I left Macedonia, no church entered into partnership with me in giving and receiving except only you. You were my only church that supported me as a missionary. Even in Thessalonica, you sent help for my needs once and again. They supported this mission. Not that I seek the gift, but I seek the fruit that increases to your credit. I have received full payment and more. I am well supplied, having received from Epaphroditus the gifts you sent, a fragrant offering, a sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God. See, in Acts chapter 16, we read of Paul's missionary journey here, and the Philippians were the only ones to support him during this particular period. And Paul specifically remembers their support then in Thessalonica. What's interesting is from other places we infer that the church in Philippi was not a wealthy church. In fact, it looks as though they had very little, and they gave not from their abundance, but from their need. Why? Why would a church with little money and people with little money give to Paul on his missionary journey? Well, the answer is quite simple. They saw the value in what he was doing. They saw the value in the mission effort. They saw the value in what was being accomplished, the gospel being spread. It's not that the support given was impressive or abundance, but they partnered with him to enable the gospel to be spread. And in verse 17, he talks about the fruit there. What's the fruit? What's the people who are coming to know Jesus as their Savior? They saw the supreme value of sharing this gospel, and so they gave sacrificially. And Paul describes that gift as a fragrant offering, a sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God. He's using Old Testament terms there, Old Testament phrases that would remind us of Old Testament sacrifices brought to the temple. In those days, even in those days, those sacrifices cost the person bringing the sacrifice, right? Even in our day today, we should be reminded that what we give to the ministry has fruit that we may never see. See, we don't spend a lot of time talking about money here at Leesburg. In fact, one of the most frequent questions I get from new people is, how do I give other than online? We see that on the app, but because they get the app. App's a big deal. But how do we give here? Because they don't pay attention to the boxes. They don't see the boxes and stuff. We don't talk a lot about about money here, but let me tell you, sometimes we have to talk about it. And here in chapter 4, Paul gives us this principle of really two groups of people. In Philippians chapter 4, as he's describing the missionary and thanking them for their gift, we see this principle of two categories of people. And I think we all fall into these categories. Some are goers, okay? Some people are called to ministry, vocational ministry, whether it be in a church or whether it be on the mission field. Some people are called to go. I pray so deeply for our youth here at Leesburg. I pray so much for our next generation of people. I pray that the Lord raises up men and women who are called to go into ministry. There are churches shutting down across the nation. Many churches can't find good Bible preachers and children's ministers and youth workers. I pray so deeply for our next generation that God will raise up missionaries and pastors called to preach and evangelize and spread the gospel in a vocational way. There are some people who are goers, but there are some people who are senders. These senders are called to support the ministry efforts by giving through the ministry. This being a fifth Sunday, we highlight every fifth Sunday this year, we're highlighting our missions areas and department. I want to ask Larry and Joni to come and join me on the stage. Give them a hand, will you? That way it's not weird as they walk up here. Larry and Joni High, they're here, lead our missions area, our missions department, and because of your faithful support to this ministry, we're able to do a lot of things locally and abroad. And so we want to talk just a few moments about some of these mission initiatives. I'm going to push this little button so they can hear you. Let's start off with one of the biggest things here locally that we do is this thing called the Clothing Closet. It's in downtown Cynthiana. Tell us about that ministry and what's happening there.
The Clothing Closet is a used clothes ministry. We primarily get our clothing from donations, and very generous donations. A lot of that comes in. But from that point on, we need to organize it, which we actually will sort, and fold the clothing. And then the great opportunity is to be able to fill orders to those people in need of clothing, which could be work clothes, school clothes. It's amazing what clothes will do for a person. So
right now, there's a big need in our clothing closet. First of all, you all do a great job of cleaning out your closets and bringing stuff in. You do a great job with that. A lot of clothes come in. There's really not a shortage of clothing, with the exception of they always need new underwear and socks, okay? Don't bring in your used stuff, all right? New underwear and socks, they can always take that. But other than that, you've got a lot of clothes right now. But there is one big need that you need on Mondays. Tell us about that.
Because there is so much that comes through that little tiny shop, we do need help with sorting and folding, and then also filling orders for the area people. So volunteers, Mondays.
So if you're available on Mondays.
12 to 4.
12 to 4. If you're available on Mondays, maybe that's something that you could help with. We need help there. And so after the service, go talk to them at the table in the foyer, and they'll get you set up and answer any questions that you might have. We're looking for people who are able to be there pretty regularly on Mondays afternoon. So if that's you, your schedule would allow that, then go talk to them today. That would be a good thing, a big thing, big help. Do you have more there?
Men's clothing.
Men's clothing.
Men just don't give their clothes away, and so we can't give it out. But when they do,
don't have any.
Yeah.
And when they do give it away, it's not worth much.
Yeah,
but anyway,
yeah.
Sorry.
We do have a tendency to wear it out, don't we, guys? Well, let me tell you about this. Really exciting ministry opportunity and partner we're starting to partner with now. Is a young man who's going to start working with a Generation Z. I don't know if you see this, if this is part of your world, but there's a lot of really cool stuff happening on college campuses across the United States right now. There is there's excitement, there's a hunger, a spiritual hunger. A lot of these students are growing up in a world where there's no truth, and they're hungry for something that's solid, that's real. And so there's revival, and there's great need on our college campuses to partner with these people and not just share the gospel with them, the biblical gospel with them, but also, and very importantly, to partner them with a local church in that community. And so this past week, we've been able to partner with a young man named Seth Abner, and he's been called for several years now. The Lord's been working on him, and he's been disobedient. That's the best way to put it. The Lord's been working on him, and he's like, yeah, no, God, I got this figured out. In fact, he's walking away from a pretty good career to go on this 6-month mission project. Tell us more about this project.
Yeah, it's
Keep going. He'll find you.
it's called Circuit Riders. It's part of YWAM. And like John said, that he has been called to this, and he fought this, and he's leaving behind a very good, lucrative corporate job to do this, and it's for 6 months, and then has no idea what's going to happen after that. He just knows he's been called to do this. And I don't know if you guys are familiar or watch the news, or it's not in the local news, but it's in the Christian world, that there's a lot of stuff going on in big secular campuses around the world, around the country, this past spring, and hopefully starting back up this fall. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of baptisms. And like John said, he is committed. He's connected to our church, by the way.
Yep.
And we're going to support him for at least his first 6 months, if not longer. And he's going to be going into a true battleground, and not only discipling these kids, these young people, but also getting them hooked up with local churches, which is a big, big deal.
That's huge.
And so we're praying for him, and prayer's a big thing, and we're supporting him. And I just want to make 2 points off point here. You know, we heard a song today about fighting a battle that's already won, and that's what this is about. It's about fighting a battle that's already won. We can sit back and come in here and sit and leave and go, or we can fight the battle, and it takes place out there at your workplace and wherever. And also this word labor, that's in the book of Philippians like 5 times in different forms, but it's in there 5 times. This labor is intensive, exhaustive work. You go, well, how is that? Well, it is. It's emotional, and it's prayer, and it's work. And we can choose to live in the battle that's already won, or we can get out there and fight. And that's what we encourage folks to do.
And one thing in reference to that, earlier in Philippians, it says, work out your salvation. We're not saved by works, but we are required to work in our salvation. Mm-hmm. That's part of the sanctification. And then it goes on to say with fear and trembling, which is awe and fear of disobedience. I mean, I believe that active obedience is pursuing. We're all called to pursue the ministry of Christ, which is our 3 following Christ, being changed by Christ, and doing the mission, committed to the mission of Christ, which we are all called to do. And I mean, our mission field is when we leave this place.
So we've talked about the clothing closet and the need there on Mondays. We've talked about Seth Abner and his pursuits of being obedient to the call that the Lord's put on his heart. For the next several months, he's going to be going to different college campuses. They're going to be doing gospel presentations and then pairing people up, helping them find local churches to be a part of. Because we know just doing an event is fine and great, but if you're not paired up with a local church and local ministry, you're not going to have that continued growth that you need. And so that's neat. We've also got some mission opportunities that are right around the corner here at Leesburg that would be a benefit to do. Blessing Ball is right around the corner. Blessing Ball is a fantastic ministry, and if you haven't been a part of this, here's your chance, all right? It's going to be happening here soon, and the theme is Siesta in the Sun. So it'll be a fun thing. In the lobby today, you're going to see sign-ups for that as well. The Blessing Ball is where we roll out the red carpet for folks in our community who are mentally and physically handicapped. It's like a Jesus prom or a dinner and dance and type stuff, games, all kinds of cool stuff. Here's the big need. Ready? they're still looking for about 30 volunteers to be chaperones for each of our guests. They've got about 140 guests that are pre-registered to be here, and every guest has someone with them throughout the night the whole time. So with 140 people already signed up, there is a hole of about 30 people to chaperone for that night. Now, I'm not a huge math guy, but 30 people, we've got 3 services here on Sunday mornings. We need 30 people. That means that if we had 10 people from this service, just 10 people, I think my math's right there, 10 people to stand up and say, you know what, I can do that. I can fill that gap. That would be a wonderful thing. So not to push you, but let me push you. 10 of you, all right? We've got about 700 people here each weekend, all right? We need 30 people. Pitter patter, get at her. Let's roll, all right? Anything else to say about that one?
Just also remember that our next upcoming after the Blessing Ball big event is the Christmas in Lee County.
Yeah.
So just a little reminder, if you see toys on sale, grab them.
Yeah.
And put them in your closet.
Absolutely.
And tell time.
Yeah, yeah. Get new toys. Lee County Christmas will be coming up. When you see toys on sale, get them and buy them. Don't bring them here yet. Put them in your closet and we'll deal with it later, all right? That's where all the good stuff goes, right? Go in the closet, we'll deal with it later. All right, that being said, thank them, please. Let me take that one. If you'll take that. Yeah. Philippians chapter 4, we see 2 categories of people. There are those who are called to go vocationally. There are those who are called to send. That's vocationally. But I want to remind you that we all have a responsibility personally. Jesus, upon his resurrection, said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, his command, his departing words, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe everything I have commanded you. And behold, I'm with you always to the very end of the age. These are Jesus' departing words, his farewell speech to his disciples. To all of us. And these words, we might not be called vocationally to go, but we are called to send, each of us. Those who aren't called to go are called to send. And we're all called to make disciples in whatever environments we can. There are people that we talk to every single day at our works, during our commutes. We get into these systems and these cycles. We stop at the same gas stations to get gas and run into the same people. What if we started praying, Lord, give me the eyes, the ears, the heart to have a gospel conversation during this time? What if we started having those prayers now, asking, God, prepare me to be obedient, to share this gospel, to make disciples who are following Jesus, being changed by Jesus and committed to his mission. What if I could do that every day in our life? That's what we're all called to be. So really, biblically speaking, there are 3 categories of people. Those who are called vocationally to go, those who are senders. I guess there is one other category, those who were disobedient. My prayer for you is that you're not disobedient. Don't be disobedient. We have the news that the world needs to hear, and it's represented well, and we're reminded of it in this communion cup. With this bread and this juice, we're reminded of the good news that we have that we can share with those around us, that we need to share with those around us. We are lost and separated from God, but God in his great mercy sent his son, lived in perfectly obedient life, went to the cross. Upon that cross, he took my punishment, your punishment upon himself. And instead of me getting the punishment that I deserve, I'm given the opportunity to receive his righteousness.